Hello, everyone. Welcome back to All British Comedy Explained. I am Abigoliah, and with me is Tom Salinsky.
Hello there.
We have a very special treat for y'all today. We are thrilled to bring to the podcast Geoff Posner. He has directed Steve Coogan, Harry Enfield, French and Saunders, The Young Ones, and of course, Victoria Wood. Geoff is a just formidable, is that the word? Producer and director. If there's a comedy you love in Britain, Geoff probably had a hand in it.
Yeah, he's such a gent, and we're so grateful to him for giving up some of his time.
And before we go directly into the interview, you guys did touch on the fact, Tom, that you worked with Geoff on making something, and it didn't come to fruition. However, we didn't talk about what that project was. Tell us real quick, what did you work on with Geoff?
So in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was doing lots of improvisation, and we had a kind of, not a hit, but a hitette, a hitella, a show which got a modest amount of interest called Dream Date. This was an improvised romantic comedy based on the lives of two members of our audience. And one of the reasons I was excited when TV people started coming around is I thought most of the time when you bring cameras into an improvised show, you end up with a worse product. It would have been funnier and more exciting, more interesting if you were there live. But because our show was based on the lives of two people in the audience, we knew that people sitting in the audience were always checking back in on our audience volunteers who were sitting at the side of the stage, watching their avatars have this imagined life. And we knew on TV, you could cut to a close-up of that person at exactly the right moment. So there would be a chance that it could actually be a better show on TV than it was live. But we'll never know because ITV2 turned down the pilot. Well, we did shoot 2 episodes in a television studio, and that was the thrill of my life. So there you go.
Did you get a copy
of it? Yeah.
Oh, I want to see that.
I'd have to disinter it. I'm not sure where it is, but I definitely have it somewhere.
And I just want to, because you've told me this, it was such a successful live show that some of those dates turned into actual marriages.
Yeah. So as a reward for our volunteers, we'd do a deal with a local restaurant or something, and so we'd give them a date to go on afterwards. And I think they would be great dates because you'd have something to talk about. The two of you just been on this extraordinary experience. You've been plucked out of the queue, or someone had come and found you on the streets of Edinburgh and asked if you were up for this. And yes, at least one couple, maybe more, but these are the couple I'm Facebook friends with, are now married with kids.
That's amazing. That's so cool. Yeah. Well, guys, that's not what we're going to talk about in this interview. But here is Geoff Posner.
The Spontaneity Shop presents All British Comedy Explained with Abigoliah Schamaun and Tom Salinsky. This episode, Geoff Posner.
Welcome to the podcast, Geoff Posner, everybody.
Hooray!
Yay!
I should go hooray as well, but I'm too modest to. Modest.
Quite right. Geoff, we met over 20 years ago, and we were actually working on a project together, an improvised television show, which did get as far as a television studio, but did not get as far as the nation's homes. I'm sure the fault is entirely mine and not yours because you did a beautiful job on it.
It's their loss, can I say?
Well,
I still think very fondly of the project.
Yes, indeed. I don't think I've ever asked you this, though. How did you get your start in television?
Well, let's do the time warp wipe, going back into the
childhood.
1960s. So basically, I got hooked on television when I was still at school by a program called Ready, Steady, Go, which was a pop program. And suddenly a director called Michael Lindsay Hogg came in to direct it. And he changed things so much and did things that were unthinkable that a 15-year-old Geoff Posner looked at the box and said, wow, this is something I want to do. I want to create the kind of excitement and talk about the next day television that Michael did when he just took over a pop program And he made a career of it because he directed videos for the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all of that. So I was bitten by television. And when everybody else in my school was saying, oh, I'm going to be an accountant or maybe a lawyer or a vet, maybe, I
We
was
can
saying,
tell the
I
kind
want
of
to be
school you went to.
Yes, they didn't speak quite as campy as that, but I did, and I wanted to be in television, and nobody, I repeat, nobody in the world supported me because it was such an odd thing to do. And my family said, Geoffrey, why don't you be a lawyer or something like that? And I said, well, why are you
Was your
speaking
father
like
Peter
that?
Sellers?
No, no, no. They both came from Stoke Newington, which is a very puzzling way of speaking, but who knows? Anyway, I just, I was so determined to get in that I went to university, and that didn't do any good. And eventually, I got in as a junior, what's called a runner now in the BBC, but in those days was called a call boy. But call boys had kind of connotations that perhaps people nowadays don't know
I was going
about.
to say, that sounds like a very different part of the entertainment business to be a call boy.
Abby had earned me a bit of extra money on the side, so I'm not knocking it. I'm telling you. And how do you think I got on in television in the first place?
You do what you got
Anyway,
to do.
having got into the BBC, I then found out that actually everybody who had got in was equally wanting the same thing that I was wanting. So there was a battle after I'd got in because I only wanted ever to direct and produce, and I kind of worked my way up from the bottom, and then eventually I got given a chance to produce, which Paul Jackson, whom I know you know, both of you,
Mhm.
and I were a kind of a cohort of younger producers who cared more about the content of the programs that they produced, not being traditionally Saturday night entertainment, which was very male centered and rather old fashioned in its approach. And we wanted to promote what was then quite a new branch called alternative comedy. But uh, sorry, this is a long monologue. I'll go into I'll go into paragraph 2 now. I noticed that you identified, when you were talking about the young ones, you identified a kind of split between the Oxford people and the Cambridge people and people who'd come from the comedy clubs.
Mhm.
And I very much, in fact, my training thing at the BBC was a Footlights Review from Cambridge University, but I very much supported all the stuff that was coming out of the comedy clubs. They had female comics, double acts. It was a whole brand new way of looking, and Paul and I kind of set about trying to change the way that entertainment was viewed on television.
Paul Jackson tells a story that he was editing, maybe it was the pilot of The Young Ones, and there was a knock on the door, and a young man came in saying, "What are you all laughing about?" And that was you.
Uh, I didn't say, what are you all laughing about? I said, what the is going on in here? Because I should add a little nice bit for readers who like trivia. The dividing walls at the BBC, we were in sports editing suites, which had this concertina kind of. It was only made of a fabric. It wasn't by any chance soundproof. And I was trying to edit nice video, Shame About the Song, which is something from Not the Kind. I know you've got all the box sets, Tom, so
I do.
you'll know that.
Nice video, shame about the song. Nice video, shame about the song.
I was editing that, and suddenly there was this big crash coming from next door, and it sounded so real. I kind of opened the concertina, expecting people to be amongst rubble and all of that on the floor. And I think it was somebody coming through the wall in the young ones. And I said to Paul, my gosh, Paul, this is something different. And Paul then turned around and said, would you like to work on it? And
That's very nice of him.
what was the answer that I gave, do you
Yeah.
think?
No thanks, I'm fine where I am.
Yes, yes. And pull the concertina back.
Yes.
But what we wanted to have you on to talk about specifically, Young Ones is great, but we're doing that tomorrow. You worked with Victoria Wood as Seen on TV,
I did.
which is now my absolute favorite show, because Tom is teaching me all about all these British comedies and sketch shows that I have missed, and it's so delightful. How did you and Victoria come to meet or come to work together?
I got a tip from a friend of mine who said you ought to go to the theatre that is in Islington, which is a tiny little theatre behind a pub.
Mhm.
And you kind of went in, and the pub reveled in itself by charging old currency. Long after Britain had gone decimal, they insisted on charging. This was this selling point of the pub, and they put on plays in the back. Somebody said you ought to go and see this play. It's very funny. It's written by somebody called Victoria Wood, and it stars Julie Walters. And so I went to see it, and I went to see it about 2 or 3 times because I loved the angle that she came from, the angle that she wrote from, which was so different from anything that I'd encountered. And I knew that I was about to do a series for ITV, so which was the opposition in those days. So I just thought I'll see what happens. Anyway, she did the series, and then I heard that she'd been signed up by the BBC to do a
Mhm.
series there. And so I put my name forward, and I'd only started producing a year or so ago beforehand. And so they said to me, well, Geoff, you're a bit young. This is a very important step for Victoria because, she wants a bit more editorial control. She felt she'd been kind of ignored when she made the first series, and she wasn't very pleased. There's a lot hanging on your shoulders. And I didn't think of that aspect in those days. I just thought, I love her humor so much. You have to, if you're producing something and directing something, which are two different things, as you know, you have to kind of be in tune with the humor of the person you're working with. And they're all different, as Abby, I'm sure you've realized as you look through all the stuff you're going to be looking through in terms of British comedy. So you have to be in tune with it. And I thought, well, I'm perfect for it because I love everything she writes. Please, please, please. Anyway, there was a bit of behind the scenes negotiation. And then I got allocated it. And I was so delighted that her and I stayed together for 15 years.
It sounds
Wow.
like the BBC were quite protective of her. Were you wondering whether there was any resistance from any quarters of the BBC about building a whole comedy show around one woman when that was the thing that really we hadn't seen up until now?
Not just a woman, but a woman from the north,
From the
and one.
north.
Now, I ought to explain to Abby. You know what it's like. I'm sure you've been immersed enough in British culture to know that humour from the north of England is substantially different, and it was even more different in those days because the north of England still had kind of very strong roots about being different from the south, and we were all stuck-up Southerners, and they were
Mhm.
hard at work Northerners, working class and very much uncatered for on television. Um, and it is important to note that Victoria's first series was destined for BBC Two
Mhm.
because they didn't think that it was going to be mainstream enough for BBC One. So you're right, Tom. They did push the boat out a bit, and a lot of people said, well, I hope it's successful because I'm not sure that she's what people like. The series at ITV wasn't fantastically well received and all of this. So it was a lot of pressure on her, and it was also a lot of pressure on me to make things work because I was relatively inexperienced. But, I always think don't look at what you can't do, look at what you can do, and look what you've got to
Beautiful.
work with. And the writing, well, we'll get onto that, I'm sure, later on. But um, I was so thrilled to do the job that it was a sheer labor of love because I felt that I got her in a way that not everybody else did.
Mhm. And when you say it wasn't mainstream enough, was that just code for Londoners might not get it? Because even today, it seems like the entire entertainment industry and the culture still the whole country revolves around London. So even though there might be more people who live in the north, if London doesn't get it, they're like, well, then we can't do it. Is that what that meant?
I'm trying to think whether San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York and Florida are the same in the States. And there are different tastes. And there is definitely an East Coast taste as opposed to a
Yeah.
West Coast taste. So I suppose there is a similar kind of thing. But then you've got the industrial side of things. The North was very much the industrial powerhouse of Britain during the 19th century to early 20th century. So there's a kind of another layer involved on that. And the northern voice as such hadn't really been exploited much on TV, and certainly northern comics and certainly female Northern comics.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lady called Marty Kane, who was a kind of she was a comedian, but she was very much shiny floor, she big hairstyle.
My mum and dad like this one, don't they, Knuckles? They do. They do. I've known him for years. I used to play darts with him till his head went blunt. Anyway.
A completely different kind of person to Victoria, who was much more down to earth and everyday, and those are the key words really that run through all of her work in terms of the audience understanding and relating to her.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the writing a little bit, because one of the things that struck me even when I was a teenager is I'd watch a show like Not the 9 O'Clock News and see this long list of writers scroll by. And then at the end of Victoria Wood Has Seen on TV, it just says written by Victoria Wood. So she's writing 6.5 hours on her own. So at the time that you came on board, how much of that had been written and how much was she still working on?
She was still working on it. In fact, I phoned up her agent and said, when can I go and see Vic? And her agent said, well, she's not finished writing and she doesn't want you to see it until she has finished writing.
Okay.
She doesn't even want you to see bits and pieces of it because she's writing a series and then she wants to go back and look at it and see what it's like and before she releases it to you. So I kind of respected that decision, although I was dying to see what she'd written. Because, of course, I don't come by myself. I come with a whole phalanx of designers, costume designers, makeup, camera people. They're all waiting to know what's going to be the series. And we were getting nearer and nearer to the time when I should have seen it, but I certainly respect it. And I'm, never going to turn around and say it's got to be here next week. And then one day I got the go ahead and I was told you can go up and have a little reading session of all the scripts with Vic and Julie Walters. And so I went on a train. I was met at the station by Vic, which is, I think, very important, really, because she comes out and meets me. And at the house making tea was Julie Walters. So we settled down, sat on the floor. In those days I could, of course. I still can, but I'd be there still if I could.
Yes.
I'm not able to get up these days. But I sprung down to the floor and we read all of what she'd written back to back with a little break for a cup of tea in the middle, all read between Victoria and Julie. They played all the parts.
For you.
Oh,
Wow.
They're performing it. I'm proud to say I read the stage instructions beautifully. And some of the male parts I was given, but there weren't many deliberately.
Yeah.
And I was very, very privileged to hear that, because your point about multi-writers is very important, because I've done loads of series where you get all the writers into a room and then the star says, I want to do this, I want to do that, and and they go away and write it, and it's kind of okay. It has to be worked on, and how is it going to be performed? And there's not that kind of cohesion that there is when somebody writes and performs. Now, wasn't just the script, but she wrote all the music. She played a lot of instruments on the recording session. The theme song to Acorn Antiques was entirely her.
Oh.
On a stylophone it was a little plastic thing bought in a very cheap shop, which she wanted the sound of. And so I realized that actually she had written in a way that she wanted it performed. And it wasn't a question of, right, here's the script, somebody else go and do something with it. She knew how every word should be pronounced because she'd written it. And she was in it, although I've gone on record as saying I had to persuade her in the first series to be in more sketches, because she kept on saying, oh, I think so-and-so would be great at this. And I said, you should play this part. It's your show, Vic. She was so into giving the parts to other people, so generous. And they weren't just yes, Vic, no, Vic parts. They were really strong parts with jokes and lots of important roles. It wasn't just a question of Vic is in the lead and whoever is playing with her. They were great scripts for everybody to do.
There are whole sketches that she doesn't appear in. I'm thinking of Kitty, for example, with Patricia Routledge. And then I also showed Abby Two Soups, of course.
Waitress, actually.
Is that what it was called?
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm only being a bit of a nerd, but
Yes,
I'll
no,
tell you
no.
something. Yeah, I want to pause now and turn the spotlight on you two. First of all, Abby,
Mhm.
what did you make of the series when you first saw it? Being from the other side of the Atlantic, and I must say, I worked on the last series of Not the 9 o'clock News, and I have great friends in New York. And about 6 months after it was transmitted, it was being shown on a PBS channel, and I went and sat down with them to watch it.
Uh-huh.
And the program was met with complete silence.
Oh
And
no!
and I could have eaten the cushions and hidden underneath the couch if it had been wide enough for me to do so. There was nothing that related to anybody. So I'm interested to see how you related to it.
I absolutely loved it. Like, as soon as it came on, I fell in love with her. I'm a stand-up comedian, and this was the first show we watched that started with stand-up, which so I was, like, in. I thought her stand-up was really fresh. I thought it was, because a lot of it is, what's the word? Topical. I thought it was still relevant because it wasn't like so political or so referential to the time. It still worked. I thought, whoop. And I really liked the sketches. The Acorn, what Acorn Antiques,
Yeah.
which Tom explained to me that there's the running show, this running soap opera. And if he hadn't said this is a running soap opera, I might have been like, what is happening here? However, after Tom and I have watched it, I've gone on to watch the show. And in the first episode of As Seen, before they do Acorn Antiques, they're like, now we're going to take you to this soap opera. So that's your in for the rest of the show. So I was like, okay, I would have gotten that had I started at series 1. I mean, I thought it was great. I got it all. I have been in the UK for a while, despite the fact that I haven't seen any television. I have lived here for 11 years. So, but yeah, I immediately was on board. I thought it was so fun. And again, some of it's still relevant. I went back and I watched some of it today, and there's that just little short sketch with Celia Emery where she's playing a children's presenter, and she wiggles her fingers and then she wiggles her other fingers, and it's like, let's wiggle our fingers together. And then at the end, she's just like, looks at the camera and goes, this is very cheap for us to film. It costs no money and it's for kids. So who cares? Like, I'm like, that's still to me what's relevant as
But it had a message underneath it, because the
yeah,
message was it's just for children, so it's not important. And
yeah,
Vic's always felt very important, but the targets that she gets. Like, there was one commercial for sanitary towels, and there was an advert that ran on British television where they poured blue ink onto
yeah,
it because they couldn't find a way of describing how it worked or what it did. And so we did an advert where you actually said, and I have some blue ink here and I'm going to pour it on. You see, no ink is spilt and all that. So she was making a point underneath it all.
yeah,
And that's what I love. But the one thing is with Vic is that you'll have noticed, certainly as a stand-up, in terms of delivery, she used expressions that you probably found a bit strange, and proper names that you found even more obscure. And I can tell you, even in the 80s, when the program went out, she was using names from the 1960s. Because
oh yeah,
there's a line, I think, in the waitress sketch, which says, please tell us if you're related to Shirley Abaker. Now, Shirley Abaker is some obscure, sorry, Shirley family, if you're watching, some obscure singer from Australia who played a zither. It was like a harp or something, and she was a bit of a kind of a joke in those days. But Vic and I said, "Do you think anybody's heard of Shirley Abaker?" And I said, "Vic, somebody will have done, and it would have meant an awful lot to her
Yeah.
that they had." And so there are
It has the
lots of
right rhythm, though, doesn't it?
references.
It has just
Oh
a nice
yes,
cadence
yeah,
to it.
absolutely, absolutely. And so there are lots of obscure references that she delighted in. And it's the business about the type of biscuits that you mention. Is rich tea funnier than nice biscuits, and all that to do with delivery and tempo and all of those kind of things that, she, as a stand-up, she finds really important.
I love jokes that have two layers, like a name is funny enough and has a ring to it, but also if you know who that person is, it's like anyone can get it, but then the really cool people get it on a second level. That's really
Absolutely,
like, 'cause I
yeah.
didn't know that name was an actual person until you just said it. So it's like, I love that.
Can I tell you,
layers.
nobody will, apart from Shirley's family, who are probably still living in Australia, way, way, way. But that was what made Vic's work special, which is that in terms of proper names, there was and there was a funny version of a food, and there was a non-funny version of a food. And a lot, and as a stand-up, you'll understand this, a lot was to do with the rhythm of the sentence. And I always thought a lot of the sentences were like songs. They had a tempo, they had a rhythm. And in terms of the jokes, they nearly all landed exactly where they should be.
Yeah.
So did you have any input? Were there sketches that were rehearsed and not recorded, or recorded and cut before transmission? Were you and she talking about that kind of stuff? Or was it simply, here's 3 hours worth of material, let's go and do it?
No. Flash back to earlier in our conversation, if your memories are still working. When we had that read through with Julie, Vic, and I put a watch on it. I timed it, and it ran to something like 6 times 26 or 27 minutes. Now, I should add that in those days, when you worked for ITV, you used to record 25 minutes of program and 5 minutes of commercials, and you also had a break in the middle. So the program had 2 kind of places where it sort of peaked, if you like. When you did a BBC half hour, it was in those days 29 minutes 30. And so there was immediately about a 5-minute shortfall in terms of how much she should have written. But then I went and added misery to it by saying, Vic, I actually want 33 or 34 minutes of material. So we've got a few we can play around with. And if some, either in their entirety or parts, don't go down particularly well, at least we've got the choice of selecting some rather than having to put out everything that you've written. Not that I doubt in any way, but I don't think anybody is so confident in terms of the way it's, there's so many processes to go through before it actually is recorded, in terms of casting, in terms of delivery, in terms of recording it, in terms of what the audience feel about it and all that. So many processes to go through that maybe it doesn't work. At least you have the benefit of being able to select. And we'd recorded all the series beforehand. So I was able to sit down and put them all into a program order and have some that I showed Vic and said, I don't know how you feel about this, but there are others that are better, I think. And so we had that luxury. But it did mean panic on her face, because she had to generate another 5 or 6 minutes of material when she thought she was there. But she's extraordinary in terms of she was extraordinary in terms of her ability to just generate new stuff. And we did 33 minutes every week recording. Yeah.
What was her lead time for writing? How much time did she have to write the series before you guys taped it, before it went out? Like,
I'd say about a year.
Okay.
Abby, I'd say about a year, because she started the moment the BBC signed her up. I think she had written some anyway, because she learned a lot when she did the series for ITV about what worked and what didn't work. And as this was a series that was parodying TV, she had a lot of genres she could work on. For example, we had mock documentaries that were shot in documentary style. We had stand-up. Now, Vic didn't really want to do stand-up at the start of each program because she was a little bit uncertain. And I said, no, you have to. There has to be 6 programs with 6 stand-ups. And maybe
she was already
you want to
doing
write...
stand-up live, wasn't she? She was doing it on tour.
Yes, she was doing stand-up live. In terms of what she generated, there are very few people that I've met since her, who was able to kind of stand in front of the audience at the Royal Albert Hall for 15 days and fill it and make it rock with laughter, and then sit down and write a film and write a series of sketch shows. And everybody kind of has a view on sketch shows. I know you're doing a few in your series, but writing a sketch is really problematic. You've got 3 minutes. You've got to introduce who it is in the first 10, 15 seconds, then have a few jokes along the way, but then please finish it. Don't just kind of say, and now for something completely different, or some other false way, or not just have an ending. And it's really, really difficult. And so to generate all that stuff, I just thought this is a miracle. And of course, it had her voice in everyone, and everything she did, it was generated by her. And that's what gives its cohesion, I think.
All that 16mm filming, would that have been
Yeah.
done before you went into the studio?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
what was that
So
like?
what-
Did you or she prefer the control of location filming, or did you prefer the energy of the live audience?
Both. We loved it both. Horses for courses. Some stuff, I always think if you're parodying something, you actually sit down and work out what you're parodying and try and make it match as much as possible. So documentaries in those days were shot on film. So we shot our documentaries on film. And what we do is we'd go filming for 2 or 3 weeks beforehand to film all the sketches and the ins and outs if they were required of studio sketches. And then we had 2 days in the studio, and the first day was a pre-record where we'd record lots of stuff that didn't need to be done or shouldn't be done in front of an audience, like Acorn Antiques wouldn't have been as good as if we'd have done it in front of an audience.
The audience wasn't there for Acorn Antiques.
No, we showed it to the audience.
Well, of course, yeah, to get the
You showed it to
laughter.
the audience,
Is
and I'll tell you a story.
Is it because it's so technical with the camera placements and so on?
It's technical, and we want the audience to watch what's happening on the screen, not what's happening on the floor, because you don't see some of the tricks that I threw in, the directing tricks, I call them. They're not really cutting to the wrong camera, and the back. There's one scene where somebody crosses over a room and they are totally obscured by a lampshade, which I can't tell you how long that took to shoot, because every camera person has had that drilled in the same way. Remember, there was a scene when Duncan Preston, the character Duncan Preston, got up suddenly out of his chair and hit the boom.
The boom.
It was right over his head. Well, that took about 3 hours to get right, because every time the instinct of the boom up was to go. Anyway, all of that stuff. But I wanted some people to witness things as the viewer at home did. So I recorded that stuff on the first day. And then overnight, we put in what I call an insert reel, which is stuff that we'd shot on location and first day stuff, including Acorn Antiques, to show to the audience on the second day. And the way it would run is we'd have stand up at the top of the show, it live in front of the audience. Vic would run off to change, and then I'd show some of the insert reel, which I'd worked out what was shown. And then we come back for another sketch in the studio. And when that had finished, I'd show another bit of the insert reel. And so that's how the studio went on.
But you're not necessarily filming material for one show in one studio day.
No,
You're going to mix
because
and
what you
match.
do, yes, because you want the privilege of being, sometimes, you'd build a set which wanted to run for different kind of aspects. You'd change it slightly, but it was like a dining room. And so you'd record all the dining room sketches on one day and then change it slightly in between. And then you'd dot them throughout the program. So you never really saw, if you came to a studio, you'd never really see a program in its entirety. It was all put together later.
That's interesting, because I just kind of assumed that you filmed it episodically. Like episode 1, you filmed all those sketches, and then episode 2. But it makes so much more sense to like film them as you have the set, as opposed to like tear down, build up.
Also, you might end up having actresses in 2 or 3 sketches, and we definitely wanted every sketch to be self-contained, apart from the people like Julie, who appeared in 2 or 3 different sketches, but mostly it was to give us maximum flexibility. And there is a shape to the program which really only makes sense when you've recorded 6 of them, and you can put them back together. Like there was, it would go usually stand up and then a little quick, we call them quickies, which were less than 30 seconds, usually shot either on the first day or on film, which was spoof commercials, and then a stonking great two-hander with Julie as the third item in the program. And then it builds up and you'd have a strand of the soap opera, and then there'd be a film, a documentary film, and then there's a song somewhere in there, and then you'd build up the whole program, and you'd have the flexibility of putting what song went best in the best program and all of that.
Very cool.
You said it was quite a big deal for both you and for Victoria Wood. Were there nerves on your part, on her part, either when you were making it or before it went out?
Completely. I had to disguise mine because you don't want two people going. And
you have to be her rock.
That was me, by the way, not her. And no, the thing was, in the early days, Vic was very unsure of herself. She'd had a bit of a bad time at ITV. I don't want to go on about that, but it wasn't the way she wanted to work. And I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to say, of course, I know what we're doing, and this is what we do, because that's what I felt she wanted to hear, and she wanted to feel in safe hands. So, I mean, I wasn't as kind of arrogant enough in those days to say, I definitely know what I'm doing, because I didn't.
Mhm.
But I just put together a program that I thought was the funniest program with the material that we got. And well, if you're fans of hers, I can't tell you what a joy it is to hear 6 episodes back to back with 2 of the cast, and also witness that magic between Julie and Victoria. And Julie would say, "What's this sketch about?" And then Vic would say, "You remember that woman that we saw?" And then Julie would come back with the perfect characterization and do the sketch brilliantly. And I say do the sketch brilliantly because another thing that I keep on banging on about is the rhythm of her sentences and the way that cadence, the way it rises and falls and has a pattern at the end. And if you say it the wrong way, then it doesn't land. It doesn't become funny enough. And she wrote everything she wrote was along those lines. So I know that Julie had an inbuilt kind of Victoria monitor. Everything she read from Vic was just delivered perfectly first time round. She had that inner sense of the way that Vic's mind worked.
On when you guys were recording it in front of a live audience, were there any like backstage shenanigans or like things you'd always do before a shoot or anything like that?
Well, not really. I was of the impression sometimes when you go to see studio shows, the audience is there. And some people's attitude is you just provide laughs for us. That's all you're there for.
You're a
And they
sound effect.
You're a sound effect. And they tend to get treated rather badly. I went to a sketch show being recorded where they do a sketch and then the audience would be just left sitting around waiting for everybody to come back on set. I used to run studios. Everything I did was as if it was a live show. So Vic would do the stand up at the beginning, and then she very often ran off. In fact, in one program, you can actually see her starting to take off her clothes because she got changed to be in another sketch. And then I'd turn the lights down in the studio so that everybody was watching the monitor. And then I'd run the insert material, and hopefully if the next 2 people were ready, I'd bring the lights up and they were in the set, and we'd run it as fast as possible to keep the audience entertained, because I think if you're sitting there for 2 hours and you come a long way to see this, you don't want to be kept hanging around. So there was no time for anything backstage. It was all rush, rush, rush. Makeup and wardrobe were going berserk to try and get everybody ready. And then occasionally, when we did have little gaps where we couldn't put in material, we'd have rather obscure warm-up people. And my most favorite is I got hold of a guy who came on in lederhosen and played the accordion and stamped his foot and got the audience to join in. And then some of the cast came out of their dressing rooms to join in as well. And it was that kind of atmosphere that I liked to generate in the studio, because I think if you get that kind of atmosphere, the audience is going to be on your side rather than just folding their arms saying, okay, make me laugh. And if I can throw in a little supplementary thing here,
Please.
when the audience see a program for the first time, they have no idea what they're coming to see. And so we recorded stuff like Acorn Antiques on day 1 and day 2. And when I showed it to the audience, Vic said, "This is our soap opera." And they had the lady beforehand saying, da da da. They didn't understand what they were watching.
Mm.
They just sat there in total silence. And by chance, what had happened when I used to show 2 back to back, and what happened when we were recording episode 2 is that Julie had to come out as Mrs. Overall with a tray of biscuits. And I don't know whether you've experienced this, but any actor with food immediately starts to eat it. So she started eating the biscuits and she started to deliver her line and spat them all out over Victoria, corpsed. And I had to stop. We had to go back and do the scene again. And this time she didn't eat it and it went okay. When I came to edit it, I just thought, I wonder, this is not really the style of Acorn Antiques, but I wonder if I should leave in that corpsing and the going back and doing it again. And so by chance, I left it in. I put a couple of frames of black in between and I left it in and I started the scene again. And at that precise moment, the audience realized what Acorn Antiques was all about.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went back and showed the first episode again, and they laughed in all the right places because then they knew. Of course, that happened every single week because usually week 2, there'd be a brand new audience who'd never seen the program before, never knew what was happening. And it was only when we did series 2 that people looked forward to seeing Acorn Antiques and cheered, and which is something, incidentally, I discouraged because the audience at home feels they're not part of a party in the studio. But it's only in series 2 that they realized who everybody was and what everybody was doing.
I love too in Acorn Antiques, like the small little jokes of like, so it'll go to the quote unquote credit scene and then it comes back to them and they're looking at the director, quote unquote, like ready to start the scene again, which is just such a small little joke. And as you said, all the camera angles of like Victoria is in front of the camera when she shouldn't be, so she like ridiculously leans back and all the
Excuse me, Miss Babs and Miss Berta, could I have a word?
Well, if it's to ask me for another dollar for your untrustworthy cousin Joseph, then the answer's no. This last little escort cost me 32 pounds in French, not to mention apologizing to every Asian grocer between here and Manchester.
The thing of like, you're not just watching a soap opera, you're watching actors in the soap opera. I don't know, it's so fun. Did you have a lot of problems with corpsing on set? Because it's so ridiculous. The whole show's so ridiculous, not just Acorn Antiques, but all of it. Did you have to do a lot of reshoots, or by the time you got there, was everyone like in character?
I'm usually very calm, Abby, when it comes to corpsing, because not being an actor myself, I can't imagine what it's like learning a load of lines and then having to do them in front of an audience with all the pressure of the stuff. It's Victoria's lines and you want to do well and all of that, and you don't want to mess up, and then suddenly you'll say the wrong thing and you have to stop and go again. So I never ever really would get in a bad mood, because I think that doesn't help, and it's not who I am. However, there was one scene in Acorn Antiques where they have, for some mysterious reason, and this mirrored a radio soap opera that was running on the time, where they mysteriously changed the shop into a health farm. And so Acorn Antiques suddenly became the Acorn Antiques Health Spa, and Julie Walters came on in a leotard, but none of the rest of the cast had seen her, and there'd been some rather creative work in the leg area, shall I say, and she looked so ridiculous, because Mrs. Overall looked ridiculous anyway, but her dressed up in a leotard, the cast hadn't seen her, and they started to laugh. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get them to stop laughing, and the clock was ticking, and we were getting nearer to dinner break, and we had to stop and clear the scene, and everybody had to get changed, and they just couldn't get it right. Anyway, I am told that they could hear me shouting in the studio, "I've only got 2 minutes to do this." That was about the only time when, and I can understand totally, because when you see her now, it is hilarious, and she was very naughty, not showing them what she was wearing beforehand. But we didn't have too much because, you know, comedy isn't funny when you're doing it.
Sorry, it's just such a true statement.
Yes.
When comedy is just actually, it's not funny at all when you're doing it. It's very serious
Most
work.
most people say, "Oh, can you tell jokes?" I can't tell a joke for love nor money. But, you know, getting it right is a really serious and difficult thing. And so I always kind of worry and put the pressure on concentration and delivery and all of that kind of stuff. And it's tough getting it right every single time.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I tend to do what I can as a director. And one of the things that I said to the cast right at the beginning of when we started Acorn Antiques, look, here's the key that you should always remember. None of the cast of Acorn Antiques think that they are in a tatty soap opera. They're all doing it for real, and one or two things go wrong. So don't treat it as a joke. Treat it as if it's your lifeline and you're earning money from it.
Mhm.
And I think it's those little things that make them concentrate on what they're doing and stop all the corpsing and the other things. But usually, you know, you read through on, say, a Tuesday, if you're in the studio at the weekend, and then you read through the week's episode, and that's when the laughter happens, when the cast see the script for the first time or hear others perform it for the first time. And then by doing it every single day, several times, you sometimes lose the humor of it, but you know that you've got at least that bit off your chest and you can concentrate on getting it right rather than reveling in whether it's funny or not.
So, is there material that you shot that didn't make it in? And do you have that material?
Can we see
I,
it? Can we
I
have
wish,
that material?
I wish. It was very difficult in those days. I think VHSs had just come in, and there was no way that I would get all of the stuff done in the studio and recorded on VHS for me to see. That didn't happen until a couple of years later, so I don't, and I wished I did, because yes, there were sketches. There's a book by Jasper Rees that came out a couple of months ago, which had a load of scripts of Vic stuff which never went out, and so there is a lot of evidence of it, but I've not seen any sketches. I don't think the BBC kept them, and I certainly there was no way I could keep them, really.
Shame.
It is a shame.
On the question of do you have this, and I'm guessing the answer is no,
Oh,
but
yes.
I put this in our questions, and
Go on.
purely selfish. I can barely play the piano, but I really want to learn the song "Count Your Blessings," and you can't find that sheet music. Do you have any of Victoria's sheet music?
No, not at all.
Who does? Who does? Hook me up, Geoff. I need that sweet music because I can't play by ear.
It's a beautiful song.
I just thought it was so sweet. It's funny, but it's
Yeah.
so sweet, and yeah, I really like it. Yeah, I like the other ones too, but there's something about that one that I was like, this is just, I need this song in my life.
Yeah.
I need this song. I need to play it when I'm feeling down.
What are the parts, Geoff, as you look back on that show in particular? I know you've worked with Victoria in lots of projects, but looking at that first show, those 12 plus the Christmas special, what are you most proud of? What stands out in your mind?
Good
I
question.
won't say a sketch, but I mean, I do have a favorite sketch, but I don't think that helps. I think it's taking it as a whole, and I'm so proud of a series that was written from a woman's point of view and championed all the things that men can't write about. You know, there's a song called The Ballad of Barry and Frida, and that is
Yes.
called Let's Do It in common
Yes.
parlance.
Yeah.
Now, if you examine what that song is about, it's about a woman saying, "Can we make love tonight?" And the man saying, "Oh, I've just got to do lagging. I've just got to grout the tiles. I've got to do this. I've got to do that." And she is desperate because everything she doesn't seem to work. Now, at the time that we did it, those kind of songs would have been completely reversed. It would have been the man saying, "Come on, love, let's have it tonight," and the woman saying, "Oh, I've got a headache," and all of that. But what Victoria was writing about was much more real and, from a woman's point of view. I don't think that was really appreciated at the time. We just thought it's a funny song and it's got lots of funny words that Vic likes to use, like "beat me on the backside with a woman's weekly."
Weekly.
And incidentally, again, that's a rhythm thing, as you know. But that's what I'm most proud of, is that it was the first series that really, I think was a funny series performed by somebody who wasn't the traditional female performer, being extremely funny in work that she'd written and created, and music that she'd written and created, and had the lasting effect, because I still get asked to do these kind of things.
Mhm.
And although I've done a bit in my life, this is the thing that keeps coming back. Everybody
Mm.
seems to love. That itself is a great plus for me. And it was the first real major series that I'd produced.
How old
So
were you when you produced it?
If it isn't an
7.
indelicate question.
7.
7.
Right.
Yeah. If you don't feel comfortable answering that, you don't have to.
No. Listen. My Wikipedia entry reveals all. I don't know how people get this, but so it happened in 84. I must have been 35.
Very cool. And this was the first
And
big project.
this was the first big project that I'd kind of been given. And immediately after that, I did a series with Lenny Henry, who is a black comedian. And again, we broke kind of a lot of traditional stereotypes in that series. And I loved what I was doing at the time, because it was just the kind of stuff I used to love to do. And Vic was interesting because, as I said right at the beginning, she wasn't alternative in inverted commas, but she wasn't mainstream either. She just had a category all of her own.
Mm. She's
Don't
just
you agree, Tom? Because you've seen how it all divided into the Oxbridge lot, and
Yeah.
and she.
Well, I see her as belonging to one of the things that I find interesting is, so Ben Elton in his autobiography talks about the fact that the kind of stand-up he was doing on Saturday Live, which is kind of what we think of stand-up is now, it's people making observations and telling stories about their life. Very, very few people were doing that, but Victoria Wood was. And then there are a couple of other people. I'm thinking of Jasper Carrott, Billy Connolly, Dave Allen, who are all doing that. None of whom were part of that alternative comedy scene either.
Hmm.
So it's just these kind of different influences coming together from different strands. But that's one of the questions that Abigoliah asked when we started talking about Victoria Wood. Like, French and Saunders were down at the comic strip. Where was Victoria? And I said, Manchester.
Well, she was writing plays, probably.
Yes.
That was the way she got into it, by writing plays. And she came in, and she met Julie in a theatre. So she came in via the theatrical route, yeah.
Mm.
So are you working on anything now, Geoff?
Just looking back over my life and writing it all up, because
Are you
I
doing
feel
a,
I need
you doing
to.
a book?
Are you
I
doing a
am.
book?
Oh, amazing!
I
Well,
can't wait to read it.
You must come on and plug your book when it's out.
Oh, will you still be around then? It's so difficult. It's so difficult because every time I sit, well, it's a long time. Victoria was 40 years ago, and I mean, if you think about certain things, when I was talking to Jasper Reese about his book, he kept on saying, "Well, is there anything? Do you remember that?" I don't remember, because it was 40 years ago. And one tends not to. But I've done so much since then, and I just really want to pass on. This is not a kind of, I've worked with this and I've worked with that, but this is how you make a TV program, and this is what you do, and this is what you go through, because nobody imagines we go through anything, but I promise you we do. And it's a kind of written from the point of view of somebody who's made TV all their life, as to what it's like to make TV all their lives. And incidentally, on the way I work with these fabulous people. So it's semi-autobiographical, but only in that respect.
That is one question I wanted to ask is, do you have any advice to people who are trying their hand at directing and producing television comedy? Maybe how to get into it or how to find people to collaborate or like, I don't know. Do you have any advice for the kids?
Well, if you look at what appears kind of online now and on TikTok and everything else, I think people have found their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it in a different way. They don't kind of link up like we used to in the old days and kind of make formal connections. You find somebody who can hold a phone and shoot you in this way and that way. And a lot of them are really professionally made and edited and all of that. I think that's the way you do it now. You make a series of those kind of things. And maybe it comes to the attention, as a lot has, of broadcasters who think this should go further.
Mm-hmm.
We should take this further. And in the old days, you used to have to make pilots, and they
Mm-hmm.
were very hit and miss things, and sometimes they didn't work. And I made a few in my time. Um, but nowadays, you just kind of pick up a phone and get together people round you and write in an informal way. And it's much easier to do that than it was when you have to have an idea or a script, send it to somebody else to get interested in, and it's all much more formal now in those days than it is now. So
Mm-hmm.
I just look around and see who's around you and who you fancy working with.
Yeah,
It's
great
much
advice.
easier. It's much easier, Abby, than it used to be
Yeah.
years ago, because there's so many more platforms for you to show your stuff on
Yeah.
than years ago.
Yeah,
We
if you're a
also
sitcom
just
writer in the 70s, you could sell your show to the BBC or ITV or End of List.
That's it.
and also
That's it.
like my partner is a filmmaker and we've just talked about how like kits has become more and more accessible and less expensive. Like this you can film so much on one of these that in the 70s that wasn't a freaking option. And like you're right, distributing it through online platforms or stuff like that. But yeah, we do have
Abby, I had
now it's
this.
easy. Nowadays it's easy.
These
It
young people,
is.
they don't
It
know they're
is.
born.
Oh, honestly, all this was green when I started. I tell you, Vic wrote a series of plays in the mid 1980s. They were sort of half hours. They were unrelated, narrative half hours.
Mm,
And I didn't want to shoot them on film because at the time, video was taking over from film. And I hated that habit a lot of programs used to have is the moment you used to go out through the front door, it was on film. And a lot of very standard sitcoms had that because that was the way you shot it. And a film camera obviously isn't tied to anything. Do you know that in those days, you weren't even able to see what picture the film camera was looking at because monitors showing that were virtually unheard of? You had to trust the camera person who was shooting it that they would shoot what you would want. And it wasn't until the next day when you saw it back that you'd know for certain that he'd got the angle and everything else. It was unbelievable, the difference. But the moment video came in, there was this kind of halfway house. And I said to Vic, I want to shoot this series on video. And she said, well, you'll be interested to hear that I've written one about hiking on a moor, which is like mountainside, completely in the middle of the countryside, in the middle of nowhere. And the problems have people in hiking. You remember, you know what program I'm referring to,
Yeah.
Tom. It's one of the Victoria Wood half hours. Now, to get that on video required a video camera, a huge video recorder that had to be put on a sledge in order to drag round the countryside, and a man who actually monitored the picture that was receiving, and he had to be under a black shroud. So you had this big material, big box, and a man under a black shroud, and a whole host of things behind. Nowadays, it's, as you say, this, he says,
that
holding up a pretend phone, and that's all it is.
it sounds like you're describing one of those old Victorian cameras that like you had to stand
Yes.
still for like 5 minutes in order to
That
get
had
the
smoke
photo.
coming out when
Yeah.
he took the photo. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
It did seem, I mean, this is part of what I'm writing about. It did seem in my lifetime, it's all changed so dramatically and for the better, I might add, that it's hard to comprehend what we used to do in those days.
Mm.
Geoff, there's two questions that we like to finish on. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. It's been
Yeah,
absolutely
thank you.
incredible. It's been so nice to see you again.
And
Question
you too.
one is, what else should we be watching? Obviously, we're going to watch things like Only Fools and Horses, Blackadder. We know those. Those are on the list. Those are all coming. Are there any forgotten gems that we might have overlooked? And you are allowed to nominate your own work.
Oh gosh, I can't really think of anything that you haven't covered because I've seen the areas you've covered, and I know your brief is to try and explain programs that were extremely popular. And I know The Good Life and all of those kind of things. You're probably going to cover in terms of what they showed about Britain and social things and all that, and all of course Crofts and Perry's work. I'm assuming is included in your list.
Spoilers for season 2, but yeah, both The Good Life and Dad's Army are on the list.
Well, I mean, those are the classic ones that everybody looks to still. I liked Steptoe and Son.
What's that about?
It's about, now we have an expression called a rag and bone man, and they used to go around the streets with a horse at the front and a cart at the back and invited you to chuck things like old boilers or cookers or anything you had, to chuck them out and leave them on the van, and then they take them out and get them melted down or something. And this was sort of I don't know, it was an early form of kind of melting down the stuff you had in your house and recycling. And they were never thought of as being recyclists. They were thought of as being rubbish people. And this was a father and son who owned this business. And the father was old school, played by an actor who removed his teeth every time he was in front of camera, which made him look 50 years older. And a younger son who thought he was kind of really the man about town and tried desperately hard. Please do that, because I think what that program illustrates about Britain in those days is so important and brilliantly written and was hilarious.
Who was in it or who wrote it? Do you remember?
Galton and Simpson wrote it, who is a name that I'm sure you've come across, and Harry H. Corbett and Wilfrid Bramble. Wilfrid Bramble played the old man, and Harry H. Corbett his son. And there were lots of moments when the son would try and break out of the house and live his own life and leave his dad and find a girlfriend and settle down. And his dad would always block it somehow, sometimes by just appearing to be incapable of living without the son. And I just think it's full of extraordinary writing. Please, there's my nomination.
Lovely. There was an American remake. I don't know if you saw it.
Stanford and Son.
I know what Stanford and Sons is.
Yes. Yeah. That's the American version of Steptoe and Son.
Yes, let's watch it.
Listen, I want you to come out there and help me load the tub on the truck so we can take it down to the dump and dump it.
Listen, sir, you know I can't lift no tub with my arthritis and my bad heart.
There's nothing wrong with you. What are you giving me?
I ain't giving you nothing, but I know what you're trying to give me, a hernia.
We should.
Okay, all right.
We should. Sorry, Podman. We should do like a series of what everyone we have on recommends. We should do
had that in the back of my mind.
Okay, good. Tom's actually in charge. I'm just here to be the foil. I'm just here to be the one to be like, what's a Victoria Wood? Like he's the brains behind this.
Well, here's an idea for you for series 5 and 6.
Yes.
I've always been very intrigued by a program like The Office.
Yeah.
Because, as you know, The Office started in the UK, but was then adapted to the States and has had 15, 16 different versions made of it. And I happen to know, and what's really interesting, I think, is when you examine how different countries translate all the characters that are in The Office, how they view their equivalent of our stereotypes and what their stereotypes are. I mean, this is a bit nerdy, perhaps, this, but I think if you can get a translation, it's fascinating. To see how different countries kind of view the hierarchies of people working. I mean, working in an office is pretty standard throughout the world, but different countries have different ways of looking at different people. And I always thought that was really interesting because I did see a translation of a couple of them and who they cast and why the stories went. It was interesting, but that's a real nerds thing for a future series.
Yes,
That's
very much
question
so.
one. What was question two?
Question two is we give this podcast away for free. We don't make any money out of it, and we haven't offered you a fee, Geoff. But what we wondered is, in lieu of that, is there a charity that you support that you think our literally hundreds of listeners should donate to?
Well, it depends when this goes out, but I used to do a lot of work for children in need, and
Oh, yeah.
I would recommend that everybody keeps that going because it's such an amazing, huge organization that, you know, I love everything they do. And I myself have been part of Children in Need on a couple of occasions, and I loved it. I just thought it was so rewarding. So please, please, please.
Excellent. That's what we'll do.
Thank
Geoff
you.
Posner, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute honour and a treat.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.
That was Geoff. How nice to see him again. And how interesting that he brought up The Office, because that actually, if you remember, Abby, is what we're going to be watching next.
I know. I'm looking forward to it.
And you've seen The American Office, haven't you?
Yes, I have seen The American Office. I haven't seen the British one. I'm very excited. As he said, how are they different? How are the archetypes different? How do they portray them in America versus Britain? I'm going to go ahead and guess far more upbeat and happy in America.
That would not be unfair. Yeah, no spoilers, but yes, that is. I mean, there's still quite a wide streak of sourness running through the American one. But yes, just imagine how far they've had to drag the lever in order to make it palatable for mainstream American television, and now think where that lever started.
I can't wait to see. Guys, of course, thank you as always for listening to All British Comedy Explained. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe on your podcatcher app. And if you have time, maybe give us a 5-star review. Helps other people to find the show. We are on social media, British Comedy Pod on Instagram and TikTok, and we also have a Substack.
We do, yes. So you'll get one essay every 2 weeks, just sort of complementing the show we've been watching the previous week.
Yeah. All right, guys.
All right.
We will see you next time.
Until next time.
Bye.
Cheerio. You have been listening to All British Comedy Explained with Abigoliah Schamaun, Tom Salinsky, and our special guest, Geoff Posner. It was a Spontaneity Shop production for the internet. Find us online at allbritishcomedy.com, join our Facebook group, sign up to our mailing list, or follow us on Instagram or TikTok. Join us next time for episode 6, The Office.